No one ever imagined that the most mysterious agent on the southern border was a woman hiding from ghosts. Ghosts not of others, but of herself. They called her the Ghost, not because of any nickname she chose, but because she moved like a shadow and spoke like a whisper. Some said she didn't sleep, that she'd walk the perimeter alone at 3 a.m., unmoved by the howls of coyotes or the scorching desert winds. Others claimed she had no past, that she simply appeared one day with a duffel bag, a blank stare, and credentials that no one dared question. But those who looked closely could see it. The way she studied people without ever really looking at them. The way her hand twitched slightly when a loud bang echoed near the gates. The way she flinched, not visibly but deep in her bones, at certain names, certain phrases, certain silences. Lena Carter wasn't running from enemies. She was running from memories. Before she ever set foot in the dust-covered corridors of the border outpost, Lena had worn a different uniform. She had been elite, part of the kind of unit that didn't officially exist, trained for missions that didn't make the news. Delta Force, a name that carried weight and silence in equal measure. She had led men into places where maps failed and backup never came, where one mistake meant nobody went home. For a while she believed in the mission, believed that if she pushed hard enough, endured long enough, she could outrun the things she'd lost. But everything changed on her final deployment. Her unit had been ambushed, not by accident, not by bad luck, but by betrayal. Coordinates leaked, routes rerouted, safe houses that weren't safe. She watched it all unravel in a matter of hours. Friends she had trained with, laughed with, bled beside, they were erased. She survived, but not because she was lucky, because someone wanted her to. That was the worst part. When she returned to U.S. soil, the world was different. Or maybe it had always been the same, and she was just seeing it clearly for the first time. Offices, suburbs, families, careers, they all looked like puzzles she no longer had the pieces for. She couldn't sleep without seeing their faces, couldn't stand the sound of helicopters, couldn't breathe in crowded rooms. So she vanished. Not completely, not the way the desert erases footprints in a storm, but close enough. She applied to the Border Patrol under her real name, but with none of the fanfare that her record could have justified. She didn't want medals. She wanted solitude. When she arrived at Outpost 9 in southern Arizona, no one welcomed her. No one needed to. She wasn't there to make friends. She took the bottom bunk in a quiet corner, kept to herself, and volunteered for every assignment that required endurance and silence. Her routine was simple: run at dawn, train until dusk, and spend her nights memorizing every topographical map of the region. She knew the terrain better than anyone else by the second month. Every canyon, every blind curve, every place a person could disappear. She never bragged, never spoke about her past. When younger agents whispered about her being former special ops, she neither confirmed nor denied it. But there was something in the way she moved, the way she watched. Their instincts told them the rumors were true. Supervisors didn't bother her either. She followed orders, filed reports with clean precision, and never asked for backup. But what no one realized, what not even Lena fully admitted to herself, was that she wasn't just there to patrol the desert. She was there because it mirrored her. Barren, unrelenting, brutally honest. In the desert, there were no lies, no false comforts. If you made a mistake, the land punished you for it. That was the truth she'd come to live beside. But sometimes, even the most disciplined ghosts can't outrun fate. And when her name came up for a solo recon into a section known for vanishing signals and cartel whispers, Lena accepted without hesitation. She'd always worked alone. It was safer that way. Or so she thought. What she didn't know was that this mission would strip her down to her last breath, her last thread of strength, and that her survival would depend not on her training, not on a weapon, not even on another human, but on something no one could have predicted, something wild, something that didn't speak her language but knew her fear. And what happened out there in that desert would rewrite everything she believed about loyalty, trust, and what it really means to come back from the dead. The message came through at 0530, wrapped in vague phrasing and an even vaguer sense of urgency. There was movement in Sector Delta 7, a slice of hard desert most agents avoided unless ordered otherwise. No footprints, no tire tracks, just whispers. A few heat signatures flickering on the satellite feed. It could have been nothing, jackrabbits, mirage interference. But to someone like Lena, nothing was usually code for something someone doesn't want found. When she read the coordinates, her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. She knew that patch of land, a remote cluster of arroyos, high crags, and jagged rock ridges, the kind of place smugglers liked because it swallowed evidence and erased mistakes. Most agents hesitated before taking assignments out there. Lena didn't blink. Supervisor Mills delivered the briefing, but Lena had already memorized the relevant topography. She stood at the edge of the operations table, scanning the newly issued map, noting subtle differences, lines that didn't match her memory, markers that felt like they'd been shifted just slightly. When she asked Mills where the map came from, he shrugged. "Updated satellite scans," he said, avoiding eye contact. Something in his voice struck a sour chord. Lena didn't push it, yet, but she tucked the detail away like a loaded round. Suspicion was a survival instinct, and today it was screaming under the surface. By 0610, she was out in the lot, loading her gear onto the single-seat ATV she preferred over the sluggish patrol trucks. Faster, quieter, easier to abandon if things went sideways. She packed lean, canteen, tactical harness, compressed rations, a short-barrel M4, sidearm, flare kit, and her old sat phone. She didn't trust the digital comms. The desert had a way of swallowing those signals too. The last thing she strapped on was her combat knife. Not regulation issue. This one was personal, its grip worn smooth from years of use, the blade honed like her instincts. She didn't need to be told to check in every hour. She wouldn't. The sun hadn't yet breached the horizon, but the air already carried the weight of the day's heat. As she accelerated down the gravel path and cut into the dirt tracks that led toward Delta 7, a dust plume trailed behind her like smoke from a fuse. She rode without music, without chatter, just the engine's hum and the rhythmic thump of her heart. Something about today felt off, not fear. She hadn't felt that in years, but an old, familiar edge of awareness, the kind that crawled along the back of your neck before a firefight, the kind that told you someone's waiting. The terrain changed rapidly as she pushed deeper. Open scrub gave way to tight rock corridors and blind corners carved by centuries of wind and sun. She passed a rusted-out water tower, the only remnant of an old mining site, and cut into the wash beyond. This wasn't routine. There were no check-ins, no friendly voices crackling through the radio. Just the wind, the sun rising higher behind her, and the uncanny silence that followed her like a shadow. She reached a small overlook by mid-morning, dismounted, and scanned the canyon floor below through her binoculars. Movement flickered, distant and quick, gone before she could lock onto it. A trick of the light? Maybe, but probably not. She left the ATV behind, preferring to move on foot now. Boots crunching against sun-baked gravel, every step placed with purpose. She found a cluster of footprints an hour in, 3 sets, heavy, boots not local, spaced like a trained formation, cartel or worse. She knelt beside them, fingers brushing the edges. The prints were no more than a day old. That meant someone was out here, armed, likely watching, maybe listening. She stood slowly, scanning the horizon. Still nothing. The heat shimmered above the rocks. Vultures circled far off, too high to be interested in her yet. She moved with caution now, through a narrow gulch, past a dry streambed where old bones lay half buried in dust. She felt eyes, but saw no glint of scopes, no movement, just that low thrum of danger building in her chest. She was nearly 3 clicks into dead terrain when she found the first sign of something new, a steel canteen, dented and scorched, half buried beside a rock outcrop. Recent, placed or dropped. Either way, it was bait or a mistake. She crouched low, eyes scanning in a slow arc. The sun now overhead, baking the canyon floor. No cover, nowhere to run if it went loud. Still, she advanced, every instinct on fire. It happened in seconds. A metallic thud behind her, too close, too sharp. She turned, reaching for her sidearm, but the blow came first. Something heavy slammed into the back of her skull, and the desert spun sideways. Her vision flashed white, then black. She hit the ground hard. The last thing she registered was the taste of copper in her mouth and the sound of boots running toward her. Not away, toward. She hadn't been sent here by chance. She'd been sent to vanish, and the desert was ready to help bury her for good. Pain came first, blunt, crushing, primal. Then came confusion, thick and slow, like trying to think through molasses. Lena's ears rang in that high metallic pitch that followed an explosion or a sudden head trauma. She tried to move, to shift her weight, but her arms wouldn't respond. Her legs were numb. The taste of blood coated her tongue, sharp and bitter. Slowly, the world began to take shape again. Blistering heat radiating off the ground, the sting of sand grinding against her cheek, the distant hum of wind pushing through the canyon. She was on her knees, head bowed, hands wrenched behind her back, zip-tied so tightly that her fingers already felt swollen and dead. Her weapons were gone, her gear stripped. She was alone and not. Voices rose nearby, speaking Spanish with clipped confidence, the kind born not just from cruelty, but control. She cracked one eye open and saw them, 3 men, faces hidden behind balaclavas, eyes shaded by dark tactical sunglasses. They weren't amateurs. They moved like professionals, checking angles, scanning horizons. One of them, tall, broad, with a military posture he couldn't hide, walked a slow circle around her, boots crunching in the dust. He carried her M4 like a trophy. Another held her sidearm loosely at his side, mocking the weight of it like it was a child's toy. She tried to focus, to catalogue details, foot placement, gear loadouts, weapon readiness, but the pounding in her skull made it nearly impossible. Then the tall one spoke. His English was smooth but accented. "So this is the ghost they were all so scared of." He crouched in front of her, tilted his head. "Doesn't look like much now." The others chuckled. She said nothing, didn't give him the satisfaction. But inside, her mind was racing. Who were they? How had they known her route? How had they struck with such precision? And why didn't anyone at the outpost raise the alarm? He reached out, grabbed a fistful of her shirt, lifted her slightly, and looked into her eyes. "You were supposed to be harder to catch," he said, almost disappointed. Then he let go, and she slumped forward again, biting back the groan of pain that tried to rise. They weren't going to interrogate her. This wasn't about information, it was disposal. One of the others, younger, twitchier, stepped closer, brandishing a pistol. "Just finish it," he said in Spanish. "Why waste time?" But the leader shook his head. "No bullets." Too loud. "We leave no trail. She disappears." He pointed toward the cliffs. "There." Realization hit Lena like ice water down her spine. They were going to dump her, alive. Not a quick kill, a message. They wanted her to suffer, no record, no body. The desert would do their dirty work. It was personal. They dragged her, hands zip-tied, knees scraping rock, vision fading in and out. The path was uneven, each step a fresh jolt of agony. Her head lolled forward, sweat burning into the gash above her eyebrow. Blood trickled down, mixing with dust. She tried to resist, tried to twist free, but every movement only made the zip ties bite deeper. Her captors didn't speak much as they worked, only the occasional grunt or cruel laugh. They moved like men carrying out an order. When they reached the edge, she understood the full scale of what they intended. The cliff dropped 30 meters, maybe more. Jagged stone waited below, unyielding and sharp. Death, not instant, but inevitable. One of them tied a fraying rope around her midsection, looping it over a sun-bleached boulder that jutted from the cliff's edge like a cruel perch. Then they began to lower her, not carefully, not cautiously, just enough to get her dangling. When they were done, she hung there, arms bound behind her back, torso straining against the rope, feet kicking against empty air. The sun scorched her from above. The rocks below waited like teeth. The leader crouched at the edge, peering down. "Let the sun have her," he said, almost thoughtfully. "Let her feel every hour pass." Then they left. No final taunt, no goodbye. Just footsteps fading into the desert and the endless, blistering silence of high noon. Lena tried to shout, but her throat was dust. The rope groaned with each shift of her weight, the fibers dry and frayed, rubbing against sharp stone. She could feel it already wearing down, not fast, but steadily. She looked down once and regretted it instantly. The fall was long enough for thought, long enough for regret. If that rope snapped, or more likely when, it wouldn't be clean. She'd bounce off the cliff face, shatter, break, bleed out in pieces. Every part of her body screamed, her shoulders wrenched backward unnaturally, her arms numb, wrists burning with each shift. Her face was raw from sun and sand. Time stopped meaning anything. Minutes could have been hours, hours could have been minutes. Her mind played cruel tricks, images of her unit, faces now gone, the final mission replaying on an endless loop. The betrayal, the radio calls that never reached anyone, the trap that closed too quickly. She had lived through that, barely, and now she was back in the same nightmare, a different battlefield, the same enemy, betrayal and silence. She forced herself to stay awake. Sleep meant death. A shift in position, a change in tension, and that rope would unravel. But the pain made her dizzy. She could feel her consciousness fraying, just like the cord that held her. Her mouth cracked open, a dry whisper escaping, not for help, not for mercy, just the raw noise of a human refusing to die quiet. She didn't know it yet, but this cliff, this exact moment, would be the point her story shifted forever. Because while no human soul knew where she was, something else did. Something untamed. Something that shouldn't have cared, but did. It began with the wind, a shift in its rhythm, no longer the endless, mindless push of desert air, but something pulsing, rising, deliberate. Lena was half-conscious, drifting between searing pain and numb surrender when she first heard it. A sound not quite natural, not quite mechanical. It came in soft beats, distant and slow, like a drum buried beneath the sand. Her mind, fogged and frayed, tried to place it. A helicopter, number too steady, too organic. A memory stirred, faint and half-forgotten, hoofbeats. But that was impossible. Her thoughts spiraled in tight, erratic loops. She was dehydrated, bleeding, her body stretched to its limit by the sun and the rope and the weight of her own survival instinct grinding itself to dust. She had to be hallucinating. The sound grew louder, undeniable now, rhythmic, controlled. It echoed off the cliff walls with strange clarity, bouncing through the canyon like some ancient heartbeat rising from the earth. She forced her eyes open against the burn of sunlight and dust, her vision a shimmering blur. Movement flickered above the ridgeline. Shadows at first, vague and shifting, ghost-like through the heat distortion. But they solidified with each blink. Figures, shapes, not human, horses. At first, she thought they might be ranch strays, wandered too far from home. Then she saw the way they moved, untethered, unbranded, unbothered. They came in a loose formation, deliberate, powerful, heads high, manes rippling like banners in the wind. There were 5 of them, different colors, different sizes. But one stood out, jet black, built like a war animal, its body rippling with muscle under a coat so dark it looked like the desert had cast it from obsidian. A long, pale scar streaked across its shoulder like a bolt of lightning permanently etched into flesh. Its eyes locked on Lena instantly, not with fear or confusion, but with startling intent. She tried to speak, but her throat was nothing but broken glass and air. Her mouth moved, cracked and bleeding, trying to form the word help. What came out was barely a rasp, a whisper carried off by the wind. And yet the black horse reacted. Its ears twitched, nostrils flared. It stepped forward, slow and sure, toward the outcropping where the rope was anchored. The others followed but kept a respectful distance, as if knowing that whatever was happening belonged to the Dark One alone. Lena's heart stuttered in disbelief. This wasn't happening. Wild horses didn't come near humans, let alone investigate something so unnatural, so dangerous. But this one approached the rock with a kind of eerie purpose. It sniffed the rope where it looped over the stone, then nudged it with its muzzle, gently, testing, feeling the weight, the tension. She swayed slightly with the movement, and the rope creaked under the strain. Her chest tightened in panic. If it snapped now, she'd fall. And yet the black horse didn't flinch. It looked at her, not just at her body, but at her, and something ancient, something impossible, passed between them. Recognition, curiosity, maybe even intent. The wind howled, dust swirled, time stood still. Then, slowly, the horse bit down on the rope. Not wildly, not tearing, just firm, deliberate pressure. It stepped backward, the rope tightened. Lena felt her body shift, just barely, a tug of upward motion that made her eyes widen. It was lifting her. Another horse, a red mare with a white blaze across its face, stepped beside the black one, its flank bracing the rope to keep it from slipping. A third, pale gray and lean, moved toward the boulder, nudging it like it understood the anchor's weakness. Together, they stabilized the tension. The black horse backed up again, pulling harder this time. Lena groaned as her torso rose an inch. Her shoulders screamed, her wrists throbbed against the ties. But she was moving, up. It defied every law of reason. Wild Mustangs working together to lift a bound human from a cliff? It shouldn't be possible, and yet it was happening, not in a dream, not in some fever-born delusion. Real rock beneath her knees, real blood on her face, real horses defying nature itself to save someone they didn't know, couldn't understand, and had every reason to avoid. She bit her lip until it bled, grounding herself in pain, forcing her eyes to stay open. The black Mustang, its scarred shoulder glinting under the sun, pulled again, muscles rippling with effort. Each motion was precise, calculated, like it knew what was at stake. The rope scraped against the rock. The boulder shifted slightly. The other horses pressed in tighter, steadying it with their bodies. Lena's boot grazed the edge of the cliff, so close, so damn close. Then a final surge. The black horse dug its hooves into the sand and yanked with all its strength. Lena's waist crested the lip. Her knees followed. Then, suddenly, she was no longer dangling. She collapsed onto solid ground, gasping, shaking, her face buried in hot gravel, the rope now slack around her. She didn't move, couldn't. Her muscles had nothing left to give, but she was alive. Against all odds, against logic, she was alive. The Mustangs stood over her, a protective semicircle. Dust blew around them in wild eddies, but they didn't flinch. The black one stepped closer, lowered its head. She looked up, eyes locking with its dark gaze. She whispered one word, hoarse and cracked and half lost to the wind. Sable. It wasn't a name she had planned. It just came to her, unspoken, undeniable. A name that felt like it belonged to something forged in shadows and fire. The horse blinked slowly, breathing steady, calm, like it understood. Then it stepped back, giving her space, the others following its lead. No reward, no fanfare, just a silent retreat, like warriors finished with a battle. Lena's tears came then, uninvited, uncontrollable, not from weakness, from something deeper. The realization that after everything she had lost, everything she had endured, something had chosen to save her, something wild, something free, something that reminded her. Maybe she hadn't been forgotten after all. Lena lay on the rocky ledge, her limbs trembling uncontrollably, breath coming in broken gasps. The desert heat pressed down like a smothering blanket, but her body no longer had the strength to sweat. She could feel the sting of her cracked lips, the throb in her temples, the ache of her zip-tied wrists where circulation had nearly stopped. And yet none of it mattered. Not the pain, not the thirst, not the sheer exhaustion that pulled at her like an undertow, because she was no longer hanging by a thread above death. She was alive, sprawled on the sun-scorched ground, her blood warming the dust. Her thoughts staggered in jagged loops, unable to process what had just happened. The images burned in her mind were too surreal. A black Mustang with a scar across its shoulder, pulling her out of a canyon like some spectral guardian born of myth and storm. Her rational mind told her it was impossible, and yet here she was. She turned her head slowly, every movement a cry of protest from her muscles, and looked back toward the cliff's edge. The horses were still there, not galloping away, not retreating into the wilderness like a dream fading at dawn. They were standing, watching her, 4 of them now, arranged in a loose crescent just a few yards away, their bodies still tense, ears pricked, tails swishing occasionally against the ever-present desert flies. The black stallion stood at the center, as if the others orbited him. He didn't move, just stared at her, his eyes dark and fathomless, unreadable yet undeniably focused. There was intelligence in that gaze, not the simple awareness of a wild animal, but something deeper, ancient, steady, unsettling in its clarity. Lena tried to push herself upright, her zip-tied wrists forcing her to roll awkwardly onto her side before sitting with a low grunt. Her head swam, the dizziness came in waves, and her vision pulsed with every beat of her heart. But she kept her eyes on the black horse, on Sable, as she had called him, because looking away felt like losing a lifeline. She didn't understand what these horses were doing, why they had approached, why they had stayed, why they had risked so much to intervene. And the only explanation she could settle on, even through the haze of dehydration and shock, was this: they had chosen to. She had seen wild horses before, scattered across Arizona's deserts in isolated herds. They didn't come near people. They spooked easily. They didn't act in concert. They certainly didn't organize rescues. But these horses had done all of that, and now they stood as if guarding her, as if her survival wasn't just chance, but a shared mission. Lena's hand twitched toward her thigh, searching instinctively for the combat knife she no longer had. It had been stripped from her, just like the rifle, the pistol, the radio. She was defenseless, but she didn't feel threatened, not by them. The black Mustang stepped forward, just one step. Hoof against stone, it lowered its head slightly, mane cascading like smoke along the side of its neck. Lena could see the scar more clearly now, an old wound, jagged and pale against the slick darkness of its coat. A battle mark, a survivor's mark. Just like her, she didn't breathe, didn't dare move. The stallion approached another step, then another, until its head was no more than 2 feet from her. She caught its scent, dust, heat, and something earthy, and then, gently, it nudged her shoulder. The contact was electric, not painful, soft, almost curious, but it jolted her with a strange recognition. She blinked, eyes stinging, unsure if she was going to cry again or pass out. The Mustang lingered there, not retreating, not demanding, just present. Lena swallowed against the razor in her throat, tilted her head, and whispered again, barely audible, "Sable." The horse flicked an ear. A low exhale came from its nostrils, stirring dust against her cheek. She wasn't dreaming. This was real. She wasn't alone, not anymore. Behind Sable, the other horses began to shift. Subtle movements of hooves and weight, like a signal passed between them without sound. The grey one stepped around to the far side of the boulder where the rope had been tied. The red mare moved closer, nostrils flaring as she sniffed Lena's boot, then turned her gaze outward, scanning the ridge beyond the cliff. Watching for what? Lena didn't know, but the message was clear. These animals weren't just idly observing. They were engaged, aware, as if they sensed danger wasn't yet done with the woman they'd just saved. Lena leaned forward, grimacing as she tried to adjust her position. Her muscles screamed. Her arms were still pinned behind her back. Blood had dried in patches down her forearm. Her lips were peeling, her throat a desert of its own. She needed water, medical attention, rest. But none of that mattered more than what she was seeing now. A pack of wild horses, standing vigil over her like sentries in a forgotten war. She tried to speak again. "Why, me?" she rasped, not expecting an answer. The desert gave her none, but the black Mustang dipped its head once more, and for a moment she felt something shift. It wasn't language. It wasn't logic. It was something deeper, the kind of connection forged in silence and survival when two wounded souls recognize each other, not as enemies or strangers, but as echoes of the same pain. She didn't remember when she lost consciousness again. The moment crept up silently, folding her back into darkness like a hand drawing a curtain. But this time, it wasn't a surrender to death. It was a descent into rest, into something close to safety. And just before it took her, she remembered one last thing: Sable's eyes, unblinking, steady, waiting, as if promising her, without words, "You're not done yet." The light stung. Harsh and blinding, it filtered through her swollen eyelids like broken glass. Lena's first instinct was to shield her eyes, but her arms didn't respond. Her entire body felt foreign, like a heavy suit of armor she could no longer control. Every breath burned. Each inhale scraped down her throat like dry sandpaper, her lungs refusing to cooperate. At first, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then, as the fog of unconsciousness slowly thinned, the memories surged in brutal flashes: the ambush, the cliff, the rope, the horses. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't dead. Not yet. Her cheek was pressed to stone, blisteringly hot under the midday sun. The sharp bite of the desert air scraped across her cracked lips. Her arms were still pinned behind her, the zip ties now cutting even deeper, swollen skin bulging against unforgiving plastic. She tried to shift, to sit up, but the pain shot down her spine like lightning. Her strength was nearly gone. Dehydration had taken its toll. Her muscles were cramping, her tongue had swollen, and her vision came in and out like a damaged feed. She was at the breaking point, her mind drifting in and out of lucidity, and yet something anchored her to the moment. It was the sound. Hoofbeats, not the chaotic stampede of a spooked herd or the distant thrum of ranch riders, but a deliberate, measured rhythm, the sound of control, of presence. Lena forced her eyes open just enough to scan the jagged horizon, and there they were, still, unbelievably, impossibly still there. The black Mustang, Sable, stood just a few feet away, facing outward like a sentinel. Its body was still as stone, only the occasional flick of its tail breaking the illusion of a statue. The others had spread out slightly, not far, their silhouettes steady and alert. One was on higher ground, the red mare with the white blaze, scanning the dunes as if expecting someone or something to appear. The grey lingered near Lena, pacing slowly in a wide arc, occasionally nudging the earth with its hoof, kicking up little clouds of dust that shimmered in the punishing light. And Sable, he hadn't moved from his post. That scar on his shoulder gleamed under the sun, a white strike across darkness like war paint etched in flesh. Lena tried to speak, but all she could manage was a choked grunt. She twisted her shoulders slightly, trying to find some kind of leverage. The pain was unbearable, but she gritted her teeth and rolled to one side, her ribs lighting up with fire. Finally, she found a rock, jagged and protruding just enough. She wriggled toward it like a wounded animal, her movements pitifully slow. The horses didn't intervene, but they watched her with focused intensity, as if they understood that what she was doing wasn't weakness. It was survival. Inch by inch, she pressed her bound wrists against the rock's edge, sawing at the plastic with whatever strength remained in her. It wasn't fast. Every shift of her arms sent pain radiating through her shoulders, but she didn't stop. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Blood trickled down her wrists where the jagged edge caught skin. She closed her eyes, imagining the sound of the plastic weakening, imagining the pop of release. Then, a sudden snap. The ties split. Her arms collapsed forward, numb and trembling, but free. The first thing she did was pull them around and stare at her hands, purple and swollen, nerves tingling with pain as blood rushed back into her fingers. She massaged them weakly, hissing through her teeth. Then, slowly, shakily, she sat up. Her body wobbled, her vision doubling briefly. She pressed a palm to the earth to steady herself and looked again at the horses. They were still there, and now, as she sat upright, Sable approached. No fear, no hesitation. He stopped beside her and lowered his head once more, as if checking to see if she could stand. Lena touched her fingertips to the coarse black mane, the act both reverent and desperate. The contact steadied her more than she expected. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice a rasp. "I don't understand why, but you stayed." Then, as if confirming her observation, Sable turned slightly and took a slow step away from her, then stopped, looked back, waited. She blinked in confusion. Then he did it again, another step. Pause, a glance over the shoulder, a signal. Lena's pulse quickened. He wasn't just standing guard anymore. He wanted her to follow. Her legs screamed in protest as she shifted her weight, trying to rise. The world tilted on its axis. She dropped back to her knees, groaning. But she tried again, digging deep into reserves of strength she didn't know she still had. Slowly, agonizingly, she stood. Her knees buckled once, but she stayed up. Her hands went to Sable's neck, using the horse for balance. He didn't flinch, just stood there, solid and calm, his body radiating heat and strength. With a last look at the desert stretching out beyond the cliff, Lena whispered under her breath, "Let's go." She didn't know where he was leading her. She didn't know if there would be water, or shelter, or help. She didn't know if this was even real. But in that moment, she knew one thing with absolute clarity: this horse, this wild-scarred Mustang, who should have fled at the scent of blood, was the only ally she had in a land that wanted her dead. And he had come back, not once, but again. Each time she had slipped closer to the edge, this creature had stepped forward. So she followed, because if the desert had decided to give her a second chance, she wasn't about to waste it. Not now, not after everything, and especially not while she still had the strength to walk. Each step was a negotiation between pain and purpose. Lena leaned heavily against Sable's shoulder as she limped across the unforgiving terrain, the sun still punishing in the late afternoon sky. Her legs wobbled beneath her, every muscle quivering from dehydration and exhaustion, but she kept moving, driven not by logic or strategy, but something deeper, instinct maybe, or trust. The trust between a battered human and a wild creature that had chosen, against all odds, to help her. Behind them, the vast canyon where she had nearly died receded into the shimmering heat, swallowed by the desert's silence. Ahead, there was only open land, dust, stone, and mirage. No clear destination, but Sable walked as though he knew exactly where they were going. The others followed close behind, the rest of the small herd keeping formation like an escort, but Sable remained her guide. His pace was deliberate, almost measured to her slow, staggering gait. Each time she faltered, he would pause, glance back, give her the space to recover before pressing forward again. She didn't understand how or why this was happening. She didn't have the strength to unravel the mystery now. All she could do was hold on to this unlikely thread of survival and pray it led somewhere that wasn't another trap. Time became a blur. The landscape passed in a haze of golden sand and jagged rock. The oppressive heat began to fade, replaced by a dry evening breeze that chilled her sweat-soaked clothes. Shadows stretched across the desert floor, turning the rocks into dark sentinels watching from a distance. Lena's feet dragged, every joint aching, her shoulders still throbbing from being bound so long. Her throat was raw, her lips split and stinging. The taste of blood lingered on her tongue, but still she didn't stop. She didn't ask where Sable was leading her. What would have been the point? Words felt useless out here. This was a world that communicated through presence, through silence, through subtle movements and unwavering eyes. She was beginning to understand it, feel it in her bones. The desert didn't care who you were. It only cared if you belonged. And maybe, just maybe, Sable had decided she did. As night began to fall, the temperature dropped with startling speed. The heat vanished almost instantly, replaced by a deep desert chill that wrapped around her like wet canvas. Her skin prickled, and the bruises along her ribs and hips flared back to life with every breath. Still, Sable kept walking. Still, she followed. It was near nightfall when she first saw the lights, small, faint pinpricks in the distance. They wavered like mirages, but as she squinted through the growing darkness, she realized they weren't tricks of the eye. They were real. Flickering. Electric. She stumbled. Her knees gave out for a moment and she hit the ground hard, hands scraping against stone. Her vision went black for a few seconds. The sky spun. Pain exploded across her side. She let out a dry, cracking sound that was meant to be a curse but came out as nothing. Then she felt it, warm breath on her face. She opened her eyes to see Sable, muzzle inches from her, those dark, ancient eyes staring into hers. She didn't know how he knew what she needed. He just did. With monumental effort, she grabbed onto his mane and used it to pull herself upright again. The other horses circled around protectively, forming a wide arc behind her. And still, no panic, no fear, only patience, as if they'd done this before, as if this wasn't their first time saving someone lost. The lights grew larger, clearer. Soon she could make out structures, a tall fence line, floodlights, the angular shape of buildings half buried in the sand. It was a border patrol outpost, one of the forward stations. She knew that perimeter. She had been there before. It had been over 2 days since she last checked in, maybe 3. She couldn't be sure. Time had become too fluid, too warped by pain and heat. As they neared the outer boundary, she heard a shout, then another. She saw figures moving along the fence line, flashlights swinging. The gates were opening, vehicles pulled forward, headlights piercing the gloom. The sound of an engine roared to life. Lena stopped in place, her knees buckling again, but this time she didn't fall. Sable shifted, his flank pressing into her leg, steadying her. Then, just as she collapsed to her knees with exhaustion, a group of agents rushed forward. She saw them in flashes, uniforms, helmets, hands reaching out, voices overlapping. Someone shouted her name. Someone said, "It's Hart! It's Agent Hart!" And then everything became too bright, too loud, too much. A strong pair of arms caught her just before she hit the ground completely. The last thing she saw before her eyes fluttered shut was Sable stepping back into the shadows, his body lit by the outpost's floodlights, head high and still, watching, waiting, not running, not yet. She passed out to the sound of boots on gravel and hushed, urgent voices. But in the chaos of her rescue, in the gasps and confusion of those discovering she had somehow survived, no one noticed the wild black Mustang that stood just beyond the gate. Not leaving, not retreating, just keeping watch, like a ghost from another world. For a long time, Lena drifted in and out of consciousness, her body too battered to do much more than survive on autopilot. The cool touch of saline flowing through her veins, the distant murmur of medical voices, and the soft beep of monitoring equipment became her entire world. Somewhere in the fog, she heard her name spoken again and again, sometimes gently, sometimes urgently. It was all so far away, like echoes in a canyon. When she finally clawed her way back to full awareness, it was not with a dramatic jolt or gasp. It was quiet, slow, heavy. Her eyes opened to the pale overhead lights of the infirmary, her senses dulled but steady. The air smelled of antiseptic and desert dust, and her body was wrapped in a cocoon of bandages, monitors, and exhaustion. She blinked, adjusting to the unfamiliar calm, trying to remember if she had dreamed the whole thing. Sable, the cliff, the escape. But then she turned her head and saw him. Standing just outside the chain-link fence beyond the infirmary window, barely visible in the dull gray of pre-dawn, was a silhouette that made her breath catch. Motionless, statuesque, with his head lowered slightly, Sable stood as though he had never left. His coat shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and that unmistakable scar across his shoulder caught the glow like a signature. He wasn't tied. He wasn't enclosed. He was simply there, watching, waiting. Lena's throat tightened with a mixture of disbelief and raw emotion. She wasn't hallucinating. The horse was real, still watching over her like a guardian of some forgotten myth. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there, but when a nurse noticed her gaze and followed it out the window, her soft intake of breath confirmed Lena wasn't alone in her shock. "That's the one," the nurse whispered, more to herself than to anyone. "That's the Mustang they keep talking about." Stories had already begun spreading through the outpost, about the black horse that had followed the agents back from the desert, that had stood sentinel without tether or handler for hours. Some believed it was trained. Others said it was a fluke, some leftover ranch horse gone feral. But Lena knew better. She had seen what Sable had done. She had felt it. There was no command in the world that could explain how a wild Mustang had pulled her up from a cliff, walked her across miles of open land, and refused to leave even after the job was done. She forced her aching body to sit up slightly, a soft groan escaping her lips. The nurse tried to stop her, urging her to rest, but Lena waved her off. Her strength was returning, however slowly. More importantly, her will was returning. The same will that had carried her through combat zones and special operations, the same drive that had helped her survive betrayal in both war and peace. She sipped carefully from the cup handed to her, savoring the feel of water on her cracked tongue. Each swallow burned, but she welcomed the pain. Pain meant she was alive. As the sun began to rise, casting long fingers of light through the slats of the infirmary blinds, Lena saw the outpost begin to stir. Agents shuffled past the windows, technicians checked the gate. A radio buzzed with activity. But still, outside the fence, Sable stood unmoving, a dark beacon against the paleening landscape. When Maria Torres entered the room a little after sunrise, her face lined with fatigue but alight with relief, Lena's first question wasn't about the outpost, or the attack, or the mission. It was just one word, cracked and hoarse. "Sable?" Maria glanced out the window, then nodded slowly. "Hasn't left," she said. "All night. He stood there while we stitched you back together. Scared off anyone who got too close. Even the guards kept their distance. It's like he's waiting for you to come back around." Lena swallowed hard, her chest swelling with emotion she didn't have words for. She wasn't someone who cried easily. She had trained herself not to. But the tears came anyway, silent and hot, trailing down her cheeks unchecked. Maria stepped closer, her voice lowering. "The higher-ups are asking questions," she said. "They want to know what happened out there. Your map was altered. The patrol route led you directly into a communications dead zone. We think someone set you up. And we're digging into who, but it's complicated. Carver was the one who approved the route." Lena stiffened. The name hit her like a slap. Carver, her supervisor, the man who'd handed her the map, who told her it was routine, who had reassured her backup wasn't necessary. She hadn't thought to question him, not then, but now. Now it all clicked. The missing data, the lack of radio contact, the precise location of the ambush. It hadn't been bad luck or cartel coincidence. It had been a calculated betrayal. "I want to see the logs," she said, her voice still raw but steady. "The route files, the map edits, all of it." Maria hesitated but eventually nodded. "You'll get them, but you need to rest first. You nearly died out there." Lena shook her head. "I didn't nearly die," she said. "They tried to kill me. That's not the same thing." Outside, the black Mustang shifted his weight slightly, ears flicking forward as a group of agents passed by. One of them, a younger tech, tossed a glance at Sable, muttering something about the ghost horse that wouldn't leave. Lena listened without comment. Let them tell their stories. Let them speculate. Only she knew the truth, and she would carry it whether they believed or not. When Maria returned an hour later with a folder in her hands and grim determination in her eyes, Lena was ready. They went through every page together, digital signatures, patrol approvals, timestamps, and there it was, her name forged, her signature duplicated from a previous mission file, a false entry placed to make it look like she had volunteered for the route. But she hadn't, And the name tied to the access log that edited the map? Supervisor Neil Carver. Her pulse began to race. Everything inside her went cold. It was betrayal all over again, not in a war zone halfway across the world, but here, on American soil. Carver had sold her out, maybe for money, maybe for power, maybe just to bury her past and eliminate a threat. But he hadn't counted on a wild horse doing what no man dared. He hadn't counted on Sable. Lena leaned back, her body aching but her resolve sharpened like a blade. "He tried to disappear me," she whispered, "and it almost worked. But now we disappear him." Maria didn't argue. She nodded once, jaw tight. "We'll get him," she promised. "We'll get every last one of them." Outside the window, Sable turned his head toward the rising sun. His silhouette framed in gold, the scar across his shoulder like a lightning bolt frozen in time. He didn't make a sound. He didn't need to. He had already spoken louder than any words ever could. The outpost shifted from tense vigilance to quiet urgency. Every hallway buzzed with whispers. Lena Hart had returned, alive, wounded but speaking, and that alone was enough to unravel a web of silence that had been wrapped around the station for months. Her presence was a disruption, a challenge, proof that something sinister had threaded itself into their operations, and that it had failed to finish the job. Word spread quickly. She had been set up, left for dead, and somehow clawed her way back with the help of a wild Mustang. But gossip was only the tip of the storm building behind locked doors and encrypted files. After the confirmation that Carver's digital signature was linked to the forged map and tampered duty logs, Maria and Lena didn't wait for official clearance to dig deeper. With every passing hour, they uncovered more fragments. Small things at first, details that didn't raise alarms on their own. A missing surveillance report here. An unlogged vehicle there. Communications that went strangely quiet when Carver was on duty. And then there was the pattern. Routes reassigned at the last minute, always to the most isolated stretches, always under the pretext of tracking suspicious movement. And of those reassigned agents, Lena wasn't the first to go missing, but she was the first to come back. The more they discovered, the more urgent the threat became. Lena could feel it in her bones. Carver had planned everything, the ambush, the radio silence, the route into the dead zone. He had counted on the desert finishing the job, on cartel smugglers doing the dirty work, leaving no evidence. And had it not been for Sable, it would have worked. Her death would have been written off as another tragic loss in the field, another name in the system. And Carver? He would have kept shaking hands, signing documents, and rerouting agents straight into danger. Maria leaned over a map now taped across the operations board in the back room, red markers showing locations of recent unsolved disappearances and suspicious chatter. Lena stood nearby, her arms crossed despite the bruising beneath the bandages. The pain hadn't gone away, but she welcomed it. It sharpened her thoughts, kept her grounded. "He's been doing this for longer than we thought," Maria muttered, eyes scanning the network of points. "The way he's spread it out, changing details just enough, it's not sloppy, it's surgical." Lena nodded grimly. "Which means we have to assume he won't wait long to clean up what's left. If he knows I'm awake, and I guarantee he does, he won't hesitate." By nightfall, the power flickered. Once, then twice, then all at once. The lights died. The hum of the outpost's aging infrastructure went silent, replaced by an eerie stillness that sucked the air from the room. Emergency exit lights glowed dim red. Radios sputtered static before falling quiet. The generators didn't kick in. That wasn't a malfunction. That was sabotage. Every instinct Lena had honed over a decade of black ops screamed in unison. This wasn't a failure of equipment. It was an execution phase. She turned to Maria. "They're here." Maria was already grabbing her gear. "Server room's priority one. If they wipe the logs, we lose the case. We lose everything." Lena nodded. "Then we don't let them." The two moved swiftly, silently. Lena took the lead despite her injuries, weapon steady in her hand, steps quiet but deliberate. She knew this station, knew its angles, its blind spots, and more importantly, she had nothing left to lose. They encountered the first attacker near the communications alcove, a man in tactical gear, face obscured by a balaclava, crouched and armed. Lena dropped low and fired. One clean shot. He collapsed without a sound. Maria didn't flinch. They kept moving. Down the west corridor, they found the second. This one came at them fast, raising his weapon. Before either agent could react, a sound thundered from outside. A sharp neigh, feral, furious, and then a flash of movement. The side gate buckled under the weight of something powerful. The Mustang came crashing through. Sable, a streak of shadow and muscle and rage. He hurled himself at the attacker with a force that defied logic. Hooves slammed into the man's side, sending him flying into a concrete pillar. He didn't get up. Lena stared, frozen for a heartbeat, then snapped back to motion. "He's covering the rear," she said, voice full of awe. "Let's go." The server room wasn't far, but every step was a gamble. Sounds of gunfire erupted near the entrance lobby. They didn't know how many had breached the gates, or how many were cartel, how many were insiders still loyal to Carver. But it didn't matter. They had to get the files, the digital proof that would tie everything to Carver, the route alterations, the forged patrol assignments, the login IDs. All of it was there, waiting. When they reached the final hall, they found the door already forced open. A man stood inside, typing frantically at a console, wiping files, deleting the evidence. Lena raised her weapon and fired before he even noticed she was there. The bullet struck the terminal just as he ducked, sparks flying. He went down, tackled by Maria, who bound his hands behind his back with a pair of flex cuffs pulled from her vest. Lena dropped into the chair before the terminal, her fingers dancing across the keys, trying to save what she could. Her vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, ignoring the sharp throb in her temples. Maria stood watch at the door, weapon raised. "How much did he get?" "Too much," Lena growled. "But not everything." She found the backup logs, the redundant data stream Carver likely didn't even know existed. She initiated a data transfer to an encrypted external drive, the seconds ticking by like gunshots in her head. Then footsteps, loud, fast, angry. Carver himself appeared at the end of the corridor, gun drawn, eyes wild with rage. He raised it toward Lena. "You were supposed to die out there," he snarled. "You ruined everything." Maria fired first, a warning shot that clipped his arm. Carver flinched but didn't drop the weapon. He stepped forward. "I built this place," he spat. "I kept it alive while the rest of you played by the rules. Do you know what I had to give up?" "You gave up your soul," Lena said coldly, "and now you're going to give up everything else." He lunged forward. A black shadow barreled down the corridor like a thunderbolt, Sable again, crashing into Carver with primal fury. The two hit the ground hard, Carver's weapon skittering across the tile. Lena limped forward, grabbed the pistol, and pointed it at him. He looked up at her, stunned and bleeding, eyes wide with disbelief. "You never deserved this uniform," she said, "and you sure as hell never deserved to lead." Maria pulled out a second pair of cuffs. "Neil Carver, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and collusion with foreign criminal entities." She tightened the plastic bindings until he hissed in pain. Outside, the floodlights finally roared back to life. The backup generator had kicked on at last. Sirens wailed in the distance. Reinforcements, summoned by a silent alarm Lena had triggered just before the ambush. It was over. Carver was done. But Lena knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. By the time the sun clawed its way over the horizon, casting a pale orange glow across the battered outpost, a strange, reverent quiet had settled over the compound. Debris from the assault still littered the concrete walkways, shattered glass, twisted bits of metal, streaks of blood half washed away by emergency medics working through the night. Agents moved carefully with the hollow-eyed stillness of people who had stared into chaos and come out the other side. Some carried weapons loosely at their sides. Others swept and cleaned, not just out of necessity, but as a ritual of control, an attempt to make the world right again. But in the very center of it all, the only thing anyone could talk about, could look at without speaking, was the horse. Sable had been sedated for surgery only hours before, the bullet wound in his flank deep but miraculously clean, having missed vital organs by mere inches. The vet who performed the operation, a desert-hardened woman named Clara Rivera, had quietly admitted afterward that she had never worked on an animal like him before, not because of the injury, but because of the stillness, the awareness. It was like he knew what we were doing, she'd said, wiping her hands on a blood-stained towel. He didn't flinch when we touched him, didn't fight the sedation, like he'd decided to trust us. I've seen smarter horses, but I've never seen one choose to survive like that. He was now lying in a shaded enclosure lined with straw, the kind they used for short-term livestock rescues, but it may as well have been a throne. Every person who passed the pen slowed their steps. Some paused to whisper to him, as if afraid to break the silence. Others brought small offerings, buckets of clean water, apples sliced into quarters, even a blanket, despite the heat. He acknowledged them with only a flick of the ears or a glance, but it was enough. The agent spoke about him now with a tone normally reserved for myth. The Mustang who had saved Agent Hart, who had taken a bullet, who had stood guard while she lay unconscious. Sable, the Watcher. That was what they had started calling him, the Watcher of El Cencio. Inside the medical wing, Lena Hart sat upright on the infirmary bed, her injuries freshly bandaged, her gaze fixed on the window. She had barely spoken since the takedown, not from pain, though that remained ever present, but from something deeper, reflection, reckoning. The betrayal ran deeper than any bullet wound. Carver had once shaken her hand, congratulated her on a flawless patrol. He had known her past, her training, the scars she carried, and he had used that knowledge to send her to die. If not for Sable, she would have disappeared into a canyon, another footnote in a desert too vast to remember names. Now Carver sat in a high-security transport on his way to federal custody, bruised, handcuffed, and staring down decades of prison time. His plan had unraveled in full view of the very agents he thought too docile, too slow to notice. But Lena didn't feel triumphant. She felt changed. The trust she had in the system, already strained by war and politics and the ghosts of her past, was broken. What remained was something different, a raw, stripped-down clarity. She trusted people, not rank or badges or protocol. People like Maria Torres, who had believed her when no one else did. People who had fought beside her when the power failed and the bullets started flying. And, more than anything, she trusted the horse that had stood by her through it all. Later that day she walked, limping but unassisted, to the open yard where Sable lay resting. Maria joined her silently, holding a file in one hand and a cold bottle of water in the other. They stood at the fence together, watching the Mustang breathe slowly, ribs rising and falling beneath a dark coat now marred by a fresh line of stitches. "He should be dead," Lena said quietly. "If he hadn't turned, if he hadn't—" She trailed off, the emotion catching in her throat. Maria passed her the water without a word. When Lena finally looked at her, Maria raised the folder. "You should see this. DHS has already processed your report. Internal Affairs cross-verified the logs. Carver's connections to cartel activity go back nearly 2 years. He was using encrypted back channels, smuggling information, routes, schedules, even names of agents." Lena took the file but didn't open it. "What's the fallout?" "Half the base leadership is under review. A few agents were placed on immediate suspension. But the rest of us, those who stood down the attack, who held the line, well, we've got more eyes on us than ever now, for good or bad." Lena nodded slowly, then gestured toward the Mustang. "And him?" Maria smiled faintly. "We've had 2 separate government entities call to ask if he's military property, like they can classify him as equipment. I told them he doesn't belong to anyone, not even you." Lena chuckled just once, a sound that surprised even her. "He'd agree with that," she said. "He's not mine. He's his own." They stood in silence for a few more minutes. Then Lena turned. I submitted something this morning, a proposal. Maria's eyebrows lifted. Oh? I'm calling it Echo, Lena said. Like my old Delta unit, Echo Mustang Recon. It's not a joke. I want to formalize the way we work with the Mustangs, not break them, not brand them. Just build trust, mutual patrols, observation. Let the horses lead us through terrain drones can't navigate. There are other Sables out there, and they know this land better than we ever will. Maria looked stunned. Then, slowly, she nodded. You really think they'd stay? Lena shrugged. That's the point. They don't have to. That's what makes it work. If they trust us, they'll come back, like he did. Her eyes didn't leave the Mustang, who now shifted, lifting his head slowly to regard them from the shade. They understand loyalty, maybe better than we do. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary began to unfold. The outpost healed, scars faded, systems repaired, morale reborn. The bullet holes in the walls were patched, but left unpainted, a quiet reminder of what had been endured. Lena worked alongside the staff to set up a dedicated section of land, open and uncontained, where Mustangs could come and go freely. Small observation towers were constructed, no cameras, no fences, just people with notepads, watching and learning. A few horses wandered through, curious but distant. None stayed, except Sable. He would leave for a night or two, disappear into the canyons. But he always returned, usually at dawn, stepping out of the mist like a shadow walking between worlds. The agents began to treat his arrival as an omen, a sign that things were stable, or perhaps that something was coming. Either way, he was now a fixture, a legend in real time. Tourists didn't know about him. News crews couldn't find him, but the people who worked the border knew. They knew the story, and they told it with reverence. As the sun set one evening, casting a golden halo over the hills, Lena approached the open yard with a small leather strap in hand. It was a collar, not a halter, not a harness, just a simple loop etched with the word Echo and a symbol she had drawn herself, a crescent moon, a canyon ridge, and the silhouette of a Mustang mid-gallop. Sable stood by the far fence, unmoving. As she approached, he didn't step away, didn't flinch, just watched. She raised the collar slowly, pausing to let him see it. "It's not a claim," she said aloud. "It's a thanks." She reached out, brushing his neck, then carefully slid the loop over his head. It rested against his thick mane, loose but secure. For a moment they stood together in silence, woman and horse, survivor and savior. Then Sable lowered his head and gently pressed his muzzle against her shoulder. Not a bow, not obedience, just recognition. The outpost kept working. The border never slept. Trouble still lingered on the edge of the map. But from that day forward, something new had taken root. A bond born not of control or command, but of respect. And whenever the desert grew too quiet, too still, there was comfort in knowing that, somewhere out there, Sable watched. Always watching, always ready, not because he had to, because he chose to.